The Florida heat pressed against my skin like a suffocating blanket as I stood in the doorway, staring at the box Charles held in his weathered hands. 3 weeks had passed since David's funeral, and I was still finding pieces of him scattered throughout our Orlando home like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter, a ring of dried residue marking where his last morning had begun. The smell of his cologne lingered in our bedroom closet, clinging to shirts I couldn't bring myself to wash. Every corner of this house whispered his name, and now Charles stood before me with something that felt like another ghost waiting to be unleashed. "You won't like what's inside," Charles whispered, his voice carrying the weight of secrets I didn't understand. His eyes, usually kind and neighborly, held a darkness that made my stomach clench with dread. We'd been neighbors for 8 years, sharing pleasantries over the fence, borrowing sugar and lawnmowers, but I'd never seen him look at me like this before. Like he was afraid of me, or maybe afraid for me. The box trembled slightly in his grip, as if even he was reluctant to let it go. I could see David's handwriting scrawled across the top in black marker, my name written in his familiar script that used to make grocery lists and love notes. My fingers reached out instinctively, drawn to those letters that spelled Karen in David's careful penmanship. The cardboard felt rough beneath my fingertips, and I noticed how Charles's knuckles had gone white from gripping it so tightly. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the humid air between us, like a prayer I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Charles shifted his weight from foot to foot, his gaze darting away from mine and settling somewhere over my shoulder, as if he couldn't bear to watch what was about to unfold. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant sound of children playing in someone else's yard, their laughter a cruel reminder that life continued even when mine had stopped. "David gave it to me before he died," Charles finally admitted, the words falling from his lips like stones into still water. "Made me promise to bring it to you if anything happened to him." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my knees weak. David had known something was coming, had prepared for his own death in ways I never could have imagined. The man who forgot to take out the trash and left his socks on the bedroom floor had somehow found the foresight to plan for a future without him. I felt betrayed and confused, angry that he'd shared secrets with our neighbor that he'd never shared with me, his wife of 12 years. The box seemed to grow heavier in Charles's hands as I processed his words, and I found myself studying his face for clues about what David might have told him. His weathered features revealed nothing, but the tension in his jaw suggested he was fighting an internal battle about whether to hand over this mysterious package. "He said you'd want to open it," Charles continued, his voice growing softer, more hesitant. "But he also said I should warn you first." The contradiction made no sense to me, and I felt a familiar frustration rising in my chest, the same feeling I'd had whenever David spoke in riddles or half-truths. Even in death, he was still keeping me guessing, still leaving me to piece together puzzles I didn't know existed. I stepped back from the doorway, gesturing for Charles to come inside, but he shook his head firmly and remained on the porch. The rejection stung more than it should have, and I realized how desperately I'd been craving human connection since David's death. My sister lived in Seattle. My parents had passed years ago, and most of our friends had been David's colleagues who'd sent flowers and casseroles but hadn't called since the funeral. Charles had been the one constant presence, checking on me, bringing groceries, making sure I was eating. Now he stood before me like a messenger delivering news he wished he didn't have to share, and I could see the conflict written across his face as clearly as David's handwriting on the box. "What kind of warning?" I pressed, my voice stronger now, fueled by a growing determination to understand what David had hidden from me. The question seemed to age Charles before my eyes, adding lines to his face that hadn't been there moments before. He looked down at the box, then back at me, his internal struggle playing out in the space between us. "The kind that changes everything," he said finally, his words carrying a finality that made my blood run cold. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, and my palms grew slick with sweat, despite the air conditioning that hummed steadily behind me. Whatever was in that box, Charles believed it would shatter the carefully constructed world I'd built around my memories of David. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across our front porch, and I realized we'd been standing there for what felt like hours, but had probably been only minutes. Time seemed to move differently now, stretching and contracting like a rubber band, making ordinary moments feel eternal while entire days disappeared without notice. I thought about the David I'd known, the man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning and who cried during romantic movies when he thought I wasn't looking. The man who'd held my hand through my mother's cancer and who'd talked about growing old together on this very porch. Could that same man have harbored secrets dark enough to require warnings? The possibility felt like a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about love, about marriage, about the life we'd built together in this house that now felt more like a mausoleum than a home. My hands trembled as I finally took the box from Charles, the weight of it surprising me with its heaviness. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it felt like I was holding the entire world in my arms. Charles stepped backward off the porch, his relief at transferring this burden evident in the way his shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry, Karen," he said, and there was genuine pain in his voice that made me want to comfort him even as my own world tilted on its axis. I promised him I'd bring it to you, but I also promised myself I'd warn you first. The contradiction in his loyalties was written across his face, and I could see how much this moment had cost him. He'd been carrying this secret for weeks, maybe longer, watching me grieve while knowing something that might change everything. I clutched the box against my chest and felt something shift inside it. Papers, maybe, or photographs. The sound was soft, but distinct, like whispers trying to escape. "How long did you know?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Charles's eyes met mine for the first time since he'd arrived, and I saw years of friendship there, along with something that looked like guilt. "About what was in the box?" "I don't know, Karen. David never told me the contents, just that it was important and that you needed to have it if something happened to him." His words should have been reassuring, but instead, they made me feel more alone than ever. Even Charles, who'd been David's closest friend, had been kept in the dark about whatever secrets my husband had been harboring. The Florida heat seemed to intensify as I stood there holding this mystery, sweat beading on my forehead despite the shade of our covered porch. I could hear the familiar sounds of our neighborhood continuing around us, lawnmowers humming, dogs barking, the ice cream truck playing its tinny melody somewhere in the distance. Life was moving forward while I remained frozen in this moment, holding a piece of David's past that he'd never shared with me. The normalcy of everything else felt surreal, like I was watching the world through glass while standing in a completely different reality. How could the sun still be shining when everything I thought I knew was about to change? "Did he seem scared when he gave this to you?" I pressed, needing to understand David's state of mind in those final weeks. Charles ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when he was thinking hard about something. "Not scared exactly," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "More like resigned, like he'd made peace with something difficult." The description didn't match the David I remembered from his last days, the man who'd been excited about our upcoming vacation to the mountains, who'd been making plans for retirement and talking about finally learning to play guitar. Had I been so blind to his inner turmoil, or had he been that good at hiding it from me? I thought about our last conversation, the morning before his heart attack claimed him in his sleep. We'd talked about mundane things, what to have for dinner, whether we needed to call the plumber about the kitchen sink, his plans to help Charles repair a section of fence between our properties. There had been nothing in his voice or manner to suggest he was carrying the weight of secrets, nothing to indicate he was preparing for death. Yet here was evidence that he'd been planning for exactly that scenario, had been thoughtful enough to ensure I'd receive whatever was in this box. The realization that I'd missed such a significant part of his emotional landscape made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. Charles shifted uncomfortably, and I could see he was eager to leave, to escape the weight of this moment that he'd been dreading for weeks. "I should go," he said, backing further away from the porch. "Let you process this in private." But I wasn't ready to be alone with whatever David had left for me, wasn't ready to face the possibility that everything I thought I knew about my husband might be wrong. "Charles, wait," I called out, my voice cracking with desperation. "What if I don't want to know? What if some secrets are better left buried?" He paused at the edge of my driveway, his expression softening with something that might have been pity. That's not a choice I can make for you, Karen. But David thought you deserved the truth, whatever it is. The word truth hung in the air between us like a challenge, and I felt a surge of anger at David for putting me in this position. How dare he die and leave me with mysteries to solve, with secrets that might destroy the beautiful memories I'd been clinging to since his death. I'd been grieving the loss of a man I thought I knew completely, mourning a love story I believed was perfect, despite its ordinary imperfections. Now I was being asked to consider that the foundation of that story might be built on lies or omissions, that the man I'd shared my bed and my dreams with had been harboring parts of himself he'd never revealed. The unfairness of it all made my chest tight with rage and sorrow. As Charles disappeared around the corner, heading back to his own house where he could pretend this conversation had never happened, I remained on the porch, holding the box that felt like a bomb waiting to explode. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that David had always loved. He used to sit in the rocking chair beside me during sunsets like this, pointing out cloud formations and making up stories about what they looked like. Those moments had felt perfect, complete, like we were exactly where we were supposed to be in life. Now I wondered if he'd been thinking about this box during those peaceful evenings, if he'd been calculating when and how to reveal whatever secrets it contained. The possibility that our most intimate moments had been shadowed by his hidden truths made me feel sick to my stomach. I carried the box inside and set it on our dining room table, the same table where David and I had shared thousands of meals and conversations over the years. The familiar surroundings felt foreign now, as if the box had somehow altered the very air in our home. I circled the table like a predator stalking prey, studying the package from every angle, looking for clues about what might be inside. David's handwriting seemed to mock me from the cardboard surface, his careful script spelling out my name with the same precision he'd used to write grocery lists and birthday cards. How many times had I seen him write my name over the years, never imagining that one day it would feel like a stranger's handwriting on a package full of secrets. The house felt impossibly quiet around me, the kind of silence that amplifies every small sound until your own breathing becomes deafening. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the air conditioner cycling on and off, the distant sound of traffic on the main road that ran past our neighborhood. These were the sounds of normal life, the background noise of the existence David and I had built together, but they felt hollow now, like echoes in an empty cathedral. I found myself straining to hear his voice, to catch some whisper of guidance about whether I should open this box or throw it away unopened. But David was gone, and the only voice I could hear was my own internal debate about whether ignorance might truly be bliss. My fingers traced the edges of the box, feeling for tape or staples, any indication of how it had been sealed. The cardboard was slightly worn, as if it had been handled many times, and I wondered how long David had been preparing this package. Had he been adding to it over months or years, collecting whatever evidence or documents it contained like a prosecutor building a case? The thought made me feel like I was on trial for crimes I didn't know I'd committed, standing accused of being naive or willfully blind to truths that had been hiding in plain sight. I'd always prided myself on knowing David better than anyone else in the world, on being the person he turned to with his fears and dreams and everyday concerns. I walked to the kitchen and retrieved a sharp knife from the drawer, the same knife David had used to open packages and cut vegetables for our dinners. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using his tools to uncover his secrets, that the implements of our shared domestic life were now serving as instruments of revelation. The blade felt cold and heavy in my hand, and I had to resist the urge to put it back in the drawer and pretend this moment had never happened. But Charles's words echoed in my mind. David thought I deserved the truth. What kind of truth required such elaborate preparation and solemn warnings? What could my gentle, predictable husband have been hiding that was so significant it needed to be preserved in a sealed box? Back at the dining room table, I held the knife poised over the tape that sealed the box, my hand frozen in indecision. Once I cut through that barrier, there would be no going back, no way to unknow whatever I was about to discover. The David I'd been mourning for 3 weeks might disappear forever, replaced by a stranger whose secrets could rewrite our entire history together. I thought about our wedding day, how he'd looked at me with such love and certainty as we exchanged vows. Had he been keeping secrets even then? Or had whatever was in this box happened later, during the years when I thought we were growing closer and more connected? The possibility that our entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies made my stomach churn with nausea. The late afternoon light streaming through our dining room windows began to fade, casting long shadows across the table and making the box look even more ominous. I'd been standing there for nearly an hour, paralyzed by the weight of decision, afraid to move forward but unable to step back. This was the moment that would divide my life into before and after, the moment when my understanding of everything I'd believed about love and marriage and truth would either be confirmed or shattered. I thought about calling my sister in Seattle, but what would I say? That my dead husband had left me a mystery box that might contain evidence of betrayal or deception? That the man I'd been grieving might not have been the man I thought I'd married? The knife trembled in my hand as I finally pressed it against the tape, the sharp edge biting through the adhesive with a soft, tearing sound that seemed to echo through the quiet house. There was no turning back now, no way to reseal what I was about to open. The tape peeled away easily, as if it had been waiting for this moment, and I could see the cardboard flaps beneath, held closed by nothing more than their own weight. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst, and I had to remind myself to breathe as I prepared to lift the lid and discover what David had thought was so important that it required warnings and elaborate preparations. Whatever was inside this box would either vindicate my faith in our marriage or destroy everything I thought I knew about the man I'd loved for 12 years. I set the knife aside and placed my hands on either side of the box, feeling the slight give of the cardboard beneath my palms. This was it. The moment of truth that David had orchestrated from beyond the grave, the revelation he'd deemed necessary despite the pain it might cause. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center myself for whatever was coming. When I opened them again, the box seemed to be waiting patiently, like a patient teacher ready to deliver a lesson I wasn't sure I wanted to learn. With trembling fingers, I lifted the first flap, then the second, and peered inside at the contents that would change everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I'd promised to love until death do us part. The first thing I saw was a photograph lying face up on top of a stack of documents, and my breath caught in my throat as I recognized David's face smiling back at me. But he wasn't alone in the picture, and the woman beside him wasn't me. She was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache with sudden, sharp jealousy. Dark hair cascading over her shoulders, bright eyes that sparkled with genuine happiness. Her hand resting intimately on David's chest as they stood in front of what looked like a beach house I'd never seen before. The timestamp in the corner showed a date from 2 years ago, when David had told me he was attending a work conference in Miami. Beneath the photograph were hotel receipts from Key West, love letters addressed to Elena, bank statements showing monthly transfers to support another woman's life, and a will leaving her a substantial portion of David's assets. Each piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage, proof that the man I'd trusted completely had been living a double life with practiced ease. At the bottom was a key with an address in Key West and a note in David's handwriting. For Elena, our sanctuary. I sat surrounded by the debris of my shattered marriage, realizing that the David I'd been mourning had never truly existed. The days that followed my discovery blurred together in a haze of rage, grief, and disbelief. I found myself alternating between wanting to destroy every trace of David's presence in our home and desperately clinging to the memories that now felt like lies. I called the number I found among Elena's letters, my hands shaking as I dialed, needing to hear her voice, to understand how she fit into the life I thought was mine alone. When she answered, her voice was soft and musical, with a slight accent that made my heart clench with jealousy. "I've been expecting your call," she said simply, and I realized that David had prepared her for this moment too, had orchestrated even this painful conversation from beyond the grave. We met at a small cafe in downtown Orlando, two women bound together by our love for the same man and our shared devastation at his loss. Elena was even more beautiful in person, but her eyes held the same hollow grief that I saw in my own mirror each morning. "He loved us both," she said quietly, stirring her coffee with trembling fingers. I know that doesn't make it right, but it's the truth. She told me about their 3-year relationship, how David had promised to leave me but kept finding reasons to delay, how she'd believed him when he said he was waiting for the right time. Her pain was genuine, her loss as real as mine, and I found myself feeling sorry for her, even as I hated what she represented. As we talked, I began to understand that David hadn't been a calculating predator, but rather a weak man who'd found himself trapped between 2 lives he couldn't bear to give up. Elena showed me pictures of their time together, and I could see the happiness in David's face, a joy that looked different from, but no less real than the contentment I'd seen in our own photos. He was going to tell you after your anniversary, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. He said 12 years deserved a proper goodbye. The revelation that he'd been planning to leave me made my chest tight with a new kind of pain. The knowledge that our marriage had been living on borrowed time without my knowledge. I drove to Key West the following weekend, using the key David had left for Elena to enter the beach house that had been their sanctuary. The space was beautiful and intimate, filled with photos of them together and mementos from trips I'd never known about. I found David's clothes in the closet, books he'd been reading, a half-finished crossword puzzle in his handwriting on the kitchen counter. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete alternate life, as real and detailed as the one we'd shared in Orlando. Standing in that house, surrounded by evidence of David's other existence, I finally understood that I hadn't just lost my husband. I'd lost my entire understanding of who he was. Months later, as I began the slow process of rebuilding my life, I realized that David's final gift hadn't been the revelation of his betrayal, but the truth that set me free from a marriage built on deception. Elena and I had become unlikely friends, bonded by our shared experience of loving a man who'd been incapable of choosing between us. We scattered his ashes together at the Key West beach, where he'd been happiest, finally giving him the honesty in death that he'd been unable to achieve in life. The box that had destroyed my old life had also given me the foundation for a new one, built on truth rather than illusion, painful, but ultimately more real than anything David and I had ever shared.